Clara Bennett stopped screaming 3 hours ago. Not because the pain had faded. The ropes still bit into her wrists like iron teeth. The blood still froze as it dripped down her arms. She stopped because no one was listening. 40 people stood watching her die between two oak trees, and not one of them would meet her eyes. The marshal who tied those ropes had once called her husband brother. Now he checked his pocket watch, waiting for the cold to finish what the mob had started. If you want to see how Clara survives and who rides through that blizzard to save her, subscribe to our channel and stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The February wind in Montana Territory cut through flesh like a butcher's blade. It howled down from the Bitterroot Mountains carrying ice and the promise of death. Clara Bennett had been hanging for 4 hours. Her arms stretched wide between two ancient oak trees, ropes wrapped tight around each wrist, pulling her shoulders to angles that God never intended. Her feet dangled 6 inches above the frozen ground, close enough to see salvation, too far to touch it. Please. The word scraped from her throat like glass on stone. Please, just let me down. No one answered. The crowd had grown since morning. 50 souls now, maybe more. Miners with hollow cheeks and calloused hands. Women clutching threadbare shawls against the bitter cold. Children peering between adult legs, learning lessons about justice that would haunt their dreams for years. Marshal Caleb Stone stood closest to the pulley system that controlled the ropes. He was a tall man, 45 years old, with salt and pepper hair and eyes the color of a frozen lake. Eyes that had once been warm. Caleb. Clara forced his name through cracked, bleeding lips. You ate Christmas dinner at my table. You called Henry your brother. Stone's jaw tightened. He did not look at her. That was before, he said. Before what? Before you murdered him. The crowd stirred. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Stone stepped closer, close enough that Clara could smell the whiskey on his breath, close enough that the crowd could not hear his words. Your husband made his choice, Stone hissed. He chose to be a fool, and you chose to run with evidence that ain't yours to carry. Evidence of what you did, what you all did. Evidence that's gonna burn Mrs. Bennett, just like you're gonna freeze. Clara spat in his face. The saliva froze before it hit his cheek. Stone wiped it away slowly, deliberately. Then he grabbed the rope and pulled. Clara's scream echoed across the frozen valley. Her shoulders wrenched backward. Her spine curved into an arc of pure agony. The crowd watched in silence. Anyone else want to question the law? Stone called out, releasing the rope just enough to let Clara sag back to her previous position. Anyone else got something to say? No one spoke. Stone nodded, satisfied. He turned his back on the woman he was killing and faced the crowd. This woman stole federal court documents. She fled lawful custody. She's a criminal and a liar, and the penalty for her crimes is what, Marshal? The voice came from the east, low and calm, like water running beneath winter ice. Every head turned. A figure emerged from the swirling snow. Horse and rider moved together as one, their shapes blurred by the blizzard until they seemed like ghosts rising from the white nothing. The horse was an Appaloosa, its brown coat marked by spots of white that seemed to glow against the gray winter sky. The rider wore a duster coat the color of old leather and a wide-brimmed Stetson that hid half his face. In his hands, steady as stone, rested a Winchester rifle. Thin smoke curled from the barrel. Clara hadn't heard the shot. The wind had swallowed it. But she saw the pulley rope beside Stone's head, the one that controlled the tension on her right arm swinging free where a bullet had cut it clean through. I asked you a question, Marshal. The rider stopped his horse 20 feet from the crowd. He did not dismount. What's the penalty? Stone's hand drifted toward the Colt at his hip. This ain't your business, stranger. I'm making it my business. You don't know what she did. I know what you're doing." The stranger nudged his horse forward one slow step at a time. "I see a woman strung up between two trees like a side of beef. I see 50 people watching her freeze to death. And I see a lawman who ain't acting much like law. She's a federal criminal. Then she belongs in federal court, in Helena, in front of a judge and a jury." The stranger's voice never rose, never wavered. "Not in the middle of a field with a rope around her wrists and a mob for company." Stone's fingers tightened around his pistol grip. "You shoot a federal marshal stranger and you'll hang right beside her." "Maybe." The stranger tilted his head, and for the first time Clara saw his eyes. Gray as storm clouds, cold as the wind that was killing her. "But you'll be dead before I swing, and so will any man behind me thinking about raising a rifle right now." Silence. Clara heard shuffling behind her, a rifle dropping to the frozen ground, then another. "I served with the 14th Infantry at Chickamauga," the stranger continued, his voice carrying clear across the wind. "I was a scout, a sharpshooter. I killed 23 Confederate soldiers in a single week, and every one of them was better armed than this crowd." He paused. "So I reckon you should ask yourself, Marshal, how lucky do you feel today?" Stone's face had gone pale, paler than the snow swirling around them. "Who are you?" The stranger smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Name's Jacob Mercer. I own the general store at the end of Main Street in Silver Ridge. Open 7 in the morning to 6 in the evening. Closed Sundays." He raised the Winchester slightly, just enough to make his meaning clear. "Now cut her down." "You're a dead man, Mercer." "Maybe so, but she'll be alive." Jacob's eyes moved to Clara for the first time. Something flickered in those gray depths. Recognition, memory. Pain. "Cut her down, Marshal. I won't ask again." Stone stood frozen for a long moment. The wind screamed between them. The crowd held its breath. Then Stone's hand moved, not toward the rope, toward his Colt. Jacob fired. The bullet tore through Stone's right hand, shattering bone and tendon. The marshal screamed and dropped to his knees, clutching his ruined hand against his chest. "I said I wouldn't ask again." Jacob dismounted in one fluid motion. He walked toward Clara, without looking at Stone, without acknowledging the crowd, without showing any sign that he had just shot a federal marshal in front of 50 witnesses. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut the rope binding her right wrist. Clara cried out as her arm dropped, the sudden release of tension, almost worse than the stretching. "I got you," Jacob said quietly. "I got you, ma'am. Stay with me." He cut the second rope. Clara collapsed forward, and he caught her before she hit the frozen ground. His arms were strong, steady. The arms of a man who had carried wounded soldiers across battlefields. "Can you stand?" "I..." Clara tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't cooperate. Her body wouldn't cooperate. Everything was pain and cold and confusion. "All right. That's all right." Jacob lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest. He carried her toward his horse, while the crowd watched in stunned silence. "This ain't over, Mercer." Stone's voice came out strangled, twisted with pain and rage. "You just signed your death warrant. Hers too. And that little girl of yours." Jacob stopped. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. Clara felt his arms tighten around her, felt the sudden tension in his body like a coiled spring. Then he turned. "What did you say?" Stone smiled through his pain, blood dripping from his shattered hand onto the frozen ground. "I know about Emma. Sweet little thing. Stays with the widow Polk when you're away. Sleeps in the back bedroom with the yellow curtains." Jacob's face changed. The cold calm vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous. Something that made even the armed men in the crowd step back. "You threaten my daughter again," Jacob said, and his voice had dropped to a whisper that somehow carried further than any shout. "And I won't aim for your hand." He turned and placed Clara across his saddle, then mounted behind her. His arm wrapped around her waist, holding her steady. "We'll find you." Stone was still shouting as they rode away. No matter where you run, we'll find you both. You can't hide from the railroad. You can't hide from the money. You're dead, Mercer. You just don't know it yet." Jacob urged his horse into a gallop. The blizzard swallowed them whole. They rode for 2 hours through the storm. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she was aware of the horse beneath her, of Jacob's arm around her waist, of the wind tearing at her clothes. Other times she was somewhere else entirely. Sitting by a fire with Henry, listening to him read from his leather-bound law books. Walking through the courthouse in Helena, her arm linked with his. Watching him smile in that way he had, like the world was a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Henry." She mumbled the name without meaning to. "Easy." Jacob's voice came from somewhere above her. "Don't try to talk." Have to tell you." "Later. Tell me later. Right now, you just need to stay alive." Clara wanted to argue. There was so much he needed to know. About the ledger. About the names. About why they wanted her dead so badly. But her body betrayed her. The cold had seeped into her bones, her blood, her thoughts. She felt herself slipping away, sinking into darkness like a stone dropped into deep water. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was Jacob's voice, barely audible above the howling wind. "Don't you die on me, Mrs. Bennet. Not after everything. Not now." Clara woke to warmth. She was lying on something soft, a bed she realized with wool blankets piled on top of her. A fire crackled somewhere nearby, casting dancing shadows on rough wooden walls. She tried to sit up. Pain exploded through her shoulders, her wrists, her back. She collapsed against the pillow with a groan. "Don't move." She turned her head. Jacob sat on a chair beside the bed, close enough to help if needed, far enough to give her space. He held a bowl of something steaming in his hands. "Where am I?" "Safe." He set the bowl on a small table. "That's all that matters right now." Clara looked around the cabin. Small but sturdy. Pine walls, stone fireplace, single window shuttered against the storm still raging outside. No decorations, no personal touches. A place built for survival, not comfort. "How long?" "Since I brought you here. About 6 hours. You were in and out most of the time." Clara looked down at her arms. Clean bandages wrapped her wrists where the ropes had cut deep. Someone had changed her into a clean cotton shirt, too big for her, probably his. "You..." She felt heat rise to her cheeks despite everything. "You undressed me. Your clothes were soaked through and frozen stiff. You'd have died of cold if I left them on." Jacob's voice was matter-of-fact, without a hint of embarrassment. "I kept my eyes where they needed to be, ma'am. Nothing more." Clara studied his face. Lines carved deep around his mouth and eyes. Gray hair at his temples. A scar on his left jaw that looked old and faded. This was not a young man. This was a man who had lived, suffered, survived. "Why? Why what? Why did you save me?" Clara pushed herself up despite the pain, needing to see him clearly. "You don't know me. You don't know what I did or didn't do. For all you know, Stone was telling the truth." "Was he?" "No. But you didn't know that." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. He stared into the fire, and Clara saw something shift behind his eyes. Something old and painful rising to the surface. 6 years ago," he said finally, "I had a sister, Rachel. She was 23, hair the color of autumn leaves, eyes that believed in justice the way most folks believe in God." Clara waited. "She was in Tombstone, Arizona territory. Got accused of stealing a horse from a rancher named Crane. She swore she was innocent." Jacob's voice hardened. "Nobody believed her. There wasn't a trial. Wasn't a jury. Just an angry mob and a length of rope and a mesquite tree." Clara felt her heart clench. "I was in Tucson when I got word. Rode through the night. Changed horses twice. Rode until my last horse collapsed from exhaustion. Jacob's hands clenched around the arms of his chair. I was one day too late. She was still hanging from that tree when I arrived, eyes wide open, staring at a sky she'd never see again. Jacob! I cut her down myself, dug the grave with my own hands, buried her under an oak tree on a hill overlooking the valley. He looked at Clara then, and she saw the ghost of that day still haunting him. I didn't cry. I didn't swear vengeance. I just stood there and felt a part of my soul die alongside my sister. Clara reached out despite the pain in her wrists. Her fingers brushed his hand. I'm sorry. Jacob looked at her hand on his. Something flickered in his gray eyes, surprise maybe, or gratitude. After that, I stopped looking. Whenever I saw injustice, I turned away. Told myself it wasn't my fight. Told myself I had Emma to think about. Told myself I couldn't save everyone. He shook his head. But that's a lie a man tells himself when he's too scared to do what's right. What changed? You. Jacob met her eyes. When I saw you hanging between those two oaks, I saw Rachel. I saw every person I'd walked past for 6 years while they suffered. I saw every time I'd looked away because looking was too hard. He paused. I decided I wasn't going to look away anymore. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes. This man she'd never met, who'd risked everything, his life, his store, his daughter, to save a stranger. Not because he knew she was innocent. Not because he expected anything in return. But because he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. Thank you, she whispered. Jacob nodded once, a small gesture that carried more meaning than words. Now. He picked up the bowl from the table. You need to eat. And then you need to tell me why Marshal Stone wants you dead badly enough to hang you in front of the whole territory. The soup was thin, just water beans, and a few strips of dried beef, but it was warm, and Clara's stomach accepted it gratefully. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, not since they'd caught her outside of Helena. Jacob sat across from her while she ate Winchester rifle resting across his knees, eyes occasionally flicking toward the shuttered window. Listening for sounds in the storm. Always listening. You asked about Stone, Clara said when the bowl was empty. About why he wants me dead. Whenever you're ready. Clara set down the bowl. Her hands were shaking not from cold anymore, but from something deeper. My husband was Henry Bennett, federal judge for this district for 12 years. Jacob nodded. I knew the name. Good man from what I heard. The best man I ever knew. Clara's voice caught. He believed the law could change the world. Believed one man with a pen and a law book could be stronger than an army. He was brave enough to live by that belief. She paused. Brave enough that it killed him. How did he die? They said he fell from his horse. August of last year, riding home from court. Clara laughed bitterly. Henry rode horses since he was 5 years old. Rode through the entire Civil War without falling once. He never fell from a horse in his life. They murdered him. It wasn't a question. Yes. Clara reached into the pocket of the 2 large shirts she wore and stopped. Her hand came out empty. The ledger. Where's... Your satchel's by the fire, drying out. Clara scrambled across the bed, ignoring the pain that screamed through her body. She grabbed the leather satchel and searched inside with frantic hands. It was there. The black leather book, small enough to fit in a man's palm, filled with Henry's careful handwriting. This is why they want me dead. She held it up. Everything Henry discovered in 12 years on the bench. Every bribe, every land fraud, every murder disguised as accident. Jacob's eyes fixed on the ledger. Names, all of them. Stone, Mayor Pritchard, Sheriff Walsh, the Northern Pacific Railroad. Clara opened the book, pointed to a page. March 1879. The Sandoval family. Refused to sell their ranch for the new rail line. Family of 4 all died in a house fire caused by an overturned oil lamp. The railroad paid Stone $3,000 to make sure no one asked questions. Jacob's face had gone hard as granite. October 1881. Clara turned to another page. Michael O'Brien, miner at the Silver Star Mine, demanded safer working conditions, died in a tunnel collapse the next week. The company paid Mayor Pritchard to declare it an accident. O'Brien. Jacob's voice was barely audible. I knew him. Good man. Left behind a wife and 3 children. They're all good people, Jacob. All the victims. Good people who got in the way of powerful men with too much money and no conscience. Clara closed the ledger and held it against her chest like a shield. Henry spent 12 years gathering this evidence. He thought if he collected enough, if he built a case strong enough, he could bring them all down at once. He was going to take it to the territorial governor, to the newspapers, to anyone who would listen. But they found out. Stone found out. He and Henry used to be friends, brothers almost. They fought together in the war, built the court system here side by side. Clara's voice hardened. Then the railroad got to Stone, threatened his family, his wife, his son. Stone chose to protect them by becoming a monster. And when Henry tried to stop him, they killed him, made it look like an accident, thought that was the end of it. Clara's green eyes blazed with something fierce grief and rage and determination, all tangled together. They didn't know about this ledger. Didn't know Henry had hidden it in a secret compartment in his desk, a compartment only I knew about because he showed me before he died, like he knew what was coming. Jacob was silent for a long moment, processing everything she'd told him. You tried to reach Helena, he said finally, to take the ledger to the newspapers. I tried, hid for 2 weeks, slept in barns and caves anywhere I could. But they had people everywhere. Every town someone recognized me from the wanted posters. Clara's voice broke. They caught me 40 miles from Helena, 40 miles from freedom, and they brought me back to make an example. Not an execution. No, a lesson. Clara looked at him, and for the first time since he'd cut her down, he saw how truly exhausted she was, how close to breaking. They wanted everyone to see what happens to people who dare challenge them. Jacob rose from his chair. He walked to the window, pushed the shutter open, a crack, looked out at the storm that still raged. I have a daughter, he said quietly. Emma. She's 10 years old, stays with a neighbor woman when I travel for supplies. She's everything I have left in this world. Clara felt her heart sink. If you need to leave, I understand. You've already done more than, I'm not leaving. Jacob turned from the window. In his gray eyes, Clara saw something that had been missing before: purpose, resolve. My sister died because good people did nothing, because they looked away, because they told themselves it wasn't their fight. He walked back to his chair and sat down, Winchester still across his knees. I've been that person for 6 years. I'm done being that person. Stone will come for you, for Emma. I know. Jacob's jaw tightened. That's why tomorrow when the storm breaks, I'm going back to Silver Ridge. I'm going to take Emma somewhere safe, and then I'm going to help you finish what your husband started. Clara stared at him. You'd risk everything, your store, your home, your life. I've already risked it, Mrs. Bennett, the moment I pulled that trigger. Jacob met her eyes, and she saw nothing but certainty in his gaze. Now we just have to make sure it was worth it. The storm howled outside. The fire crackled in the hearth, and for the first time in months, Clara Bennett felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. Hope. That night, Clara dreamed of Henry. He was sitting at his desk in the courthouse, the leather-bound ledger open before him, writing by candlelight, the way he always did when a case troubled him. She stood in the doorway watching, and he looked up and smiled that smile she loved so much. You found someone, he said. It was not a question. I don't know what I found. You know. Henry set down his pen. You've always known things before your mind catches up to your heart. He's a stranger, a shopkeeper with a daughter and nothing to gain. And yet he saved you, at the cost of everything. Henry rose from his desk and walked toward her. He seemed to glow in the candlelight, beautiful and terrible, real and impossible. The truth is like a lion, Clara. Remember, you don't have to defend it. Just let it loose, and it will defend itself. I'm scared, Henry. I know. He reached up and touched her cheek, and she felt nothing but cold air. But you were never the one who was going to give up. That's why I loved you. That's why I trusted you with this. I miss you. I'm always with you. Henry smiled, and there were tears in his eyes, or perhaps in hers. Now wake up, Clara. You have work to do. Clara opened her eyes. Morning light filtered through the gaps in the shutters. The storm had quieted sometime in the night, leaving behind a world muffled by fresh snow. Jacob was already awake. He stood by the window looking out at the brightening sky. Storm's breaking, he said without turning around. I need to get back to Silver Ridge, check on Emma, make arrangements. Clara pushed herself upright, ignoring the protests of her wounded body. How long? 2 days, maybe 3, depending on how deep the snow drifted. Jacob finally turned to face her. You'll be safe here. There's food, water, firewood. Keep the shutters closed and the fire low. Don't go outside unless you have to. And if Stone finds this place before you get back... Jacob walked to his saddlebag, pulled out a Colt revolver, and set it on the table beside the bed. You know how to use one of these? Henry taught me. Years ago. Good. Jacob checked the cylinder, made sure it was loaded. Anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you shoot first and ask questions later. Clara picked up the gun. It felt heavy in her hands, heavier than she remembered. Jacob. He stopped at the door, looked back. Be careful. Clara met his eyes. Emma needs you, and... She hesitated. I need you to come back. Something passed between them in that moment. Something neither of them was ready to name. I'll come back, Jacob said. That's a promise. Then he was gone, swallowed by the white world outside, leaving Clara alone with a loaded gun and a leather book full of secrets worth dying for. She looked at the ledger, then at the door, then at the fire burning steady in the stone hearth. I'm not dying yet, she whispered to the empty cabin. Not until the truth is free. Outside, the Montana wind began to rise again, carrying snow and secrets and the distant promise of justice. Jacob pushed his horse hard through the snow. 2 days. That's what he'd told Clara. 2 days to reach Silver Ridge, collect Emma, and make it back to the cabin before Stone's men caught up with them. He knew he was lying. Stone wasn't the kind of man who waited. He was the kind who struck fast and struck hard, crushing threats before they could grow teeth. By now, every hired gun between here and Helena would know Jacob Mercer's name, would know about the woman he'd stolen from the hanging tree, would know about the 10-year-old girl sleeping in the back bedroom with yellow curtains. Jacob rode faster. The snow had drifted deep in the mountain passes, but his Appaloosa knew these trails. They'd ridden them together for 6 years through blizzards and floods and summer fires. The horse didn't question, didn't hesitate, just pushed forward through the white nothing, like it understood what was at stake. By nightfall, Jacob had covered 20 miles. He made camp in a shallow cave, not risking a fire, eating dried beef and drinking melted snow. He didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's face. Her brown eyes so like Sarah's. Her fierce little spirit that reminded him so much of Rachel. If anything happened to her because of what he'd done. Jacob shook the thought away. He couldn't afford doubt. Not now. At first light, he was moving again. Silver Ridge appeared on the horizon just before noon on the second day. The town looked peaceful from a distance, smoke rising from chimneys, horses tied outside the saloon, children building snow forts in the street. But Jacob knew better than to trust appearances. He circled wide, approaching from the north instead of the main road. tied his horse in a stand of pines a quarter-mile from town, drew his Winchester, and started walking. Jonas Wright's blacksmith shop sat at the far end of Main Street. Jacob approached from the back, moving between buildings, staying in shadows. He'd learned this kind of movement in the war. How to be invisible, how to watch without being watched. He reached the back door of the smithy and knocked. 3 quick, 2 slow. The signal they'd used since Chickamauga. The door opened. Jonas stood there, hammer in one massive hand, face grim as a funeral. He was a big man, 6'2", shoulders wide as a barn door. His dark skin was sheened with sweat from the forge, and his deep brown eyes held a warning. "You're a damn fool, Jacob Mercer." "I know." Jacob stepped inside, scanning the smithy for threats. "Where's Emma?" "Safe. For now." Jonas closed the door, bolted it. "Widow Polk brought her to me last night. Said 2 men came asking questions. Said they knew about the yellow curtains." Jacob's blood went cold. "Did they touch her?" "No. They were just sending a message." Jonas set down his hammer. "But Jacob, they're watching. Stone's got men on every corner. The moment you show your face on Main Street, you're a dead man." "I'm not leaving without Emma." "I know you're not. That's why I already got her hidden." Jonas walked to the far wall, pushed aside a heavy workbench. Behind it was a cellar door. "She's been down there since last night. Scared but safe. That girl's got iron in her spine just like her daddy." Jacob felt something loosen in his chest. She was alive. She was safe. That was all that mattered. "I need to see her." "I know." Jonas lifted the cellar door. "But make it quick. Stone's men are doing rounds every hour. If they see me closing up shop in the middle of the day, they'll know something's wrong." Jacob descended the ladder into darkness. Emma was huddled in the corner on a pile of horse blankets. When she saw him, her face crumpled. "Papa!" She launched herself across the cellar and into his arms. Jacob caught her, held her tight, breathed in the smell of her hair. His daughter. His everything. "I'm here, Princess. I'm here." "They said you were dead." Emma's voice was muffled against his chest. "They said you shot the marshal and ran away, and you were never coming back." "Do I look dead to you?" Emma pulled back, studied his face with those 2 old eyes. "You look tired." "I am tired." Jacob cupped her face in his hands. "But I'm here, and I'm taking you somewhere safe." "What about our house? What about the store?" "Houses can be rebuilt. Stores can be reopened." Jacob's throat tightened. "You can't be replaced, Emma. Not ever." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question he'd been dreading. "The woman. The one they were going to hang. Did you save her?" "Yes." "Why?" Jacob looked at his daughter. 10 years old. Motherless for 4 of those years. Raised by a father who had taught her to shoot before she learned to dance. Who had told her stories of the war instead of fairy tales. Who had spent 6 years looking away from injustice because he was too afraid to act. She deserved the truth. "Because I couldn't save Aunt Rachel," he said, "and I've spent 6 years hating myself for it. I couldn't watch another innocent woman die while I did nothing." Emma considered this. Her face was serious, thoughtful. So much like Sarah when she was working through a problem. Mama used to say that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Jacob's eyes stung. "Your mama was the smartest person I ever knew." "I know." Emma took his hand. "So where are we going?" "Somewhere safe. You, me, and Mrs. Bennet. We're going to hide until the storm passes. And then we're going to tell the truth. All of it. And make sure the people who hurt Aunt Rachel and Judge Bennet and everyone else finally pay for what they did." Emma squeezed his hand. "I want to help." "You already are, Princess." Jacob kissed her forehead. "Just by being brave." He climbed back up the ladder, Emma close behind. Jonas was waiting at the top face, tight with tension. "We've got a problem." "What kind?" "The kind with badges." Jonas jerked his head toward the front window. "Stone just rode into town, and he ain't alone." Jacob moved to the window, staying low. Through the grimy glass he could see the main street. 6 men on horseback led by Caleb Stone himself. The marshal's right hand was wrapped in bloody bandages, but he sat tall in the saddle eyes, scanning every building, every shadow. "He's looking for you," Jonas said. "Word is he's offering $1,000 to anyone who brings you in, dead or alive." 1,000? Jacob let out a bitter laugh. "I'm flattered." "This ain't a joke, Jacob. Half the town would sell their own mothers for that kind of money." "And the other half?" Jonas was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, voice low and fierce. "The other half have been waiting for someone to stand up. Stone's been crushing this town for 5 years, taking bribes, looking the other way when the railroad wants something, letting good people disappear into mine shafts and house fires." He met Jacob's eyes. "Not everyone's forgotten what justice looks like." "How many?" "Enough, if you give the word." Jacob shook his head. "I'm not asking anyone to die for me." "You're not asking. We're offering." Jonas stepped closer. "My wife's brother worked at the Silver Star mine. You remember Michael O'Brien?" "I remember." "Stone called it an accident, said the tunnel was unstable. But Michael told me 2 days before he died that he was organizing the workers, demanding safer conditions, fair wages." Jonas's voice hardened. "That wasn't an accident. That was murder, and everyone in this town knows it." Jacob looked at his old friend, saw the pain there, the anger, the desperate need for something to change. "Even if we fight, Stone has the railroad behind him, the money, the power. And we have the truth." Jonas's dark eyes burned. "That ledger you mentioned, the one the judge kept. If that gets out, if people see the names and the dates and the numbers, Stone's finished. The railroad's finished. All of it comes crashing down. That's what Mrs. Bennett is trying to do. Get the ledger to Helena, to the newspapers. Then we help her do it." Jonas gripped Jacob's shoulder. "You gave me back my life at Chickamauga, Jacob. Carried me 5 miles with bullets flying. You never left me behind. Let me return the favor." Before Jacob could answer, Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Papa, someone's coming." Jacob spun toward the back door. Footsteps. Heavy boots on frozen ground. More than one man. "Cellar. Now." He pushed Emma toward the ladder. "Both of you." "I'm not hiding while you—" "Jonas." Jacob's voice was steel. "She's all I have. Please." Jonas hesitated. Then he grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her toward the cellar. "We'll be right here. You need help, you holler." They disappeared into the darkness. Jacob closed the cellar door, shoved the workbench back in place, and drew his Colt. The back door burst open. 2 men rushed in, pistols drawn. Jacob recognized them. Hired guns, the kind that drifted from town to town selling their trigger fingers to the highest bidder. "Mercer." The first man grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "The marshal wants a word." "The marshal can wait." "Wasn't asking." The man raised his pistol. Jacob moved. He knocked the gun aside with his left hand, drove his right elbow into the man's throat. The hired gun staggered back, choking. Jacob spun, bringing his Colt up, but the second man was faster. A fist connected with Jacob's jaw sent him stumbling into the forge. Heat seared his back. He rolled away, came up firing. The bullet caught the second man in the shoulder. He screamed and dropped his weapon. The first man had recovered, was bringing his pistol around. Jacob threw himself forward, tackled him to the ground, and they rolled across the smithy floor in a tangle of limbs and curses. The man was strong, younger than Jacob, faster. He got on top, wrapped his hands around Jacob's throat, started squeezing. Jacob's vision darkened at the edges. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only see the man's face above him, teeth bared in a savage grin. Then a shadow fell across them both. Jonas's hammer came down on the back of the man's skull with a sound like a melon hitting stone. The hired gun went limp, collapsed on top of Jacob. Jacob shoved the body aside, gasping for air. "Thought I told you to hide. You told me to help if you hollered." Jonas offered his hand, pulled Jacob to his feet. "You hollered. I didn't." "Close enough." Jacob looked at the two men on the floor. One dead, one wounded and moaning. This was it then. No going back. No pretending this was still about one woman and one rescue. This was war. "We need to move, now." Jacob grabbed his Winchester from where it had fallen. "Stone heard those shots. He'll have men here in minutes." "The back alley. I've got a wagon waiting behind the feed store." "A wagon?" Jonas smiled grimly. "I've been planning for this day a long time, Jacob. Ever since Michael died. I was just waiting for someone to take the first step." They collected Emma from the cellar. She was pale but steady, clutching the cloth doll her mother had made before she died. Jacob lifted her into his arms. "Keep your head down, princess. Don't look up until I tell you." "I'm not scared, Papa." "I know you're not, but do it anyway." They slipped out the back, moving through the maze of alleys and side streets that Jacob knew as well as his own heartbeat. Twice they heard men running past shouting orders. Twice they pressed themselves into shadows and waited, breath-held, hearts pounding. The wagon was where Jonas had said it would be. A covered freight wagon, the kind used to haul supplies from the rail depot. Samuel the miner, whose brother had died at Silver Star, sat in the driver's seat, reins in hand. "Get in the back, quick!" Jacob boosted Emma into the wagon, climbed in after her. Jonas followed. "Where are we going?" Jacob asked. "Old Mill Road. There's a farmhouse 3 miles north. Belongs to Henry Dawson. His wife was one of the Sandoval family, survived the fire that killed her parents." Samuel snapped the reins and the wagon lurched into motion. "He hates Stone more than any of us. He'll shelter you until we can figure out our next move." Jacob held Emma close as the wagon rolled through the frozen streets of Silver Ridge. Through gaps in the canvas cover he could see people watching, some with fear, some with hope, some with the hard, calculating look of men weighing whether $1,000 was worth a man's life. "Papa?" Emma's voice was small. "Are we the good guys?" Jacob looked at her, at the uncertainty in her eyes, at the weight of everything she'd seen in her 10 short years. "Yeah, princess, we're the good guys." "How do you know?" "Because we're scared, and we're doing it anyway." Emma nodded slowly. Then she leaned her head against his chest and closed her eyes. Jacob held her as the wagon carried them north, away from the only home she'd ever known, toward an uncertain future full of danger and violence and the slim hope of justice. He thought of Clara alone in the cabin waiting. He thought of Rachel hanging from a mesquite tree in Arizona. He thought of Sarah wasting away from typhoid while he held her hand and prayed for a miracle that never came. Everyone he loved either left him or died. Maybe that was his curse. Maybe he was meant to be alone. But he wasn't going to let it happen again. Not to Emma. Not to Clara. Not this time. The wagon reached the farmhouse just before dusk. Henry Dawson was a lean man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much grief. His wife Maria had the dark hair and sharp features of her Mexican heritage and a scar on her left arm from the fire that had killed her family. They asked no questions. They simply opened their door and let the refugees in. "Stone's men will search every farmhouse within 20 miles, Henry said as Maria heated soup on the stove. "We don't have much time." "I know." Jacob stood by the window watching the road. "I need to get back to the cabin. Mrs. Bennett is waiting." "The judge's widow." Henry's eyes sharpened. "She's alive. She's alive. And she has evidence. Everything her husband collected about Stone and the railroad." Henry and Maria exchanged a look. Something passed between them. Old pain, old anger, old hope that had never quite died. "The Sandoval Ranch," Maria said softly. "My family's land. The land the railroad stole. It's in the ledger. Jacob turned from the window. Every name, every payment, every murder. If we can get it to Helena to the newspapers, Stone is finished. And my family gets justice. Yes. Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to a cabinet in the corner, opened it, and pulled out a shotgun. My father taught me to shoot when I was 6 years old. He said a woman who can defend herself is a woman no one can silence. She checked the chambers, snapped them shut. Tell me what you need. Jacob looked at her, at Henry, at Jonas and Samuel, at Emma watching everything with those two old eyes. This was how revolutions started. Not with armies and generals, but with ordinary people who had finally had enough, who were willing to risk everything because the alternative was living on their knees. I need to get back to Mrs. Bennet, Jacob said. I need to bring her here where it's safe. Then we need to get that ledger to Helena. The roads are watched, Samuel said. Stone's got men at every checkpoint between here and the capital. Then we don't take the roads. Jacob pulled out a map he'd been carrying since his scouting days. There's a trail through Mullis Pass, old mining route. Hasn't been used in years. Rough terrain, but it connects to the Northern Pacific Line at Garrison. From there we can catch a train to Helena. That's a 4-day journey in good weather, Jonas said. In winter with snow could be a week, maybe more. We don't have a week. Jacob folded the map. Stone's already sent hired guns after us. Every day we wait he gets stronger. Every day we hide more people suffer. So what do you suggest? Jacob looked at them. These people who barely knew him, who owed him nothing, who were risking their lives because they believed in something bigger than themselves. I suggest we stop hiding. I suggest we fight. Before anyone could respond, the front door burst open. Cold wind rushed in. Behind it, framed in the doorway, stood a woman with auburn hair and green eyes that blazed like emerald fire. Clara Bennett. You were taking too long. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. In her hands, she held the black leather ledger. I got tired of waiting. Jacob stared at her. How did you? I followed your tracks. Borrowed a horse from your stable. Clara's voice was steady, but he could see the exhaustion in her face, the pain she was fighting to hide. You're not the only one who can survive in the wilderness, Mr. Mercer. You could have been killed. I could have been killed staying in that cabin, too. Clara walked past him, set the ledger on the table. At least this way I die fighting instead of hiding. Emma had been watching from the corner. Now she stepped forward, studying Clara with open curiosity. You're the lady Papa saved. Clara looked down at the girl. Something softened in her expression. Yes. And you must be Emma. Papa talks about you. Clara's eyes flicked to Jacob. Does he? He said you were brave. He said you didn't give up even when everything hurt. Clara knelt so she was eye level with Emma. Your papa's the brave one. He risked everything to save a stranger. Not many people would do that. I know. Emma reached out and touched Clara's bandaged wrist, gently, carefully. Does it still hurt? Yes, but it's getting better. Mama used to say that pain means you're healing, that the things that hurt the most are the things that make you strongest. Clara's eyes glistened. Your mama sounds like a very wise woman. She was. Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, the way children talk about grief they've learned to carry. She died when I was 6. I still miss her sometimes. I miss my husband too, Henry. He died last year. Maybe they're together, in heaven. Maybe they're watching us right now. Clara looked at this child, this fierce, gentle, motherless child who had somehow found the words that Clara needed to hear. Maybe they are. Jacob watched them together. His daughter and this woman he barely knew. Something passed between them that he couldn't name. Something that made his chest ache with a feeling he'd thought he'd buried with Sarah. We need to move. He forced his voice to stay steady. Clara, you shouldn't have come, but you're here now. We'll figure out the rest. I have a plan. Clara rose from where she'd been kneeling. I've had 2 days alone in that cabin to think, and I have a plan. I'm listening. We don't run to Helena. We don't hide. We bring Helena here. What do you mean? Clara picked up the ledger. Henry knew a newspaper editor in Helena, Walter Hudson, editor of the Montana Gazette. He's the only journalist Henry trusted, the only one he was sure hadn't been bought. You want to bring a newspaper man here to Silver Ridge? I want to bring him here to witness what Stone is doing, to see it with his own eyes, to hear testimony from everyone Stone has hurt. Clara's voice grew stronger, more certain. Imagine it, Jacob. The marshal who was supposed to protect this town exposed as a murderer and a fraud. The railroad company that has been stealing land and destroying families named in black and white. All of it published in the biggest newspaper in the territory. Stone will never let that happen. He'll kill Hudson before he prints a single word. Not if we do it publicly. Not if we do it in front of the whole town. Clara looked around at the faces watching her. Jonas, Samuel, Henry, Maria, Emma. This Sunday is the winter church service. Everyone in Silver Ridge will be there. Miners, ranchers, merchants, families. If we expose Stone in front of all of them, if we read from this ledger while the whole town watches, he can't silence us. Not without proving everything we're saying is true. That's insane, Jonas said. Stone's got men everywhere. The moment we step into that church, we're dead. Maybe. Clara met his eyes. Or maybe the people of Silver Ridge are tired of being afraid. Maybe they've been waiting for someone to stand up just like you said. Maybe all they need is someone to show them it's possible. The room was silent, everyone processing what she was suggesting. Finally, Samuel spoke. The Sandoval family, the Martinez family, Michael O'Brien, Judge Bennett. He listed the names like a prayer. How many more people have to die before we do something? None. Henry Dawson stepped forward, his wife beside him. I lost my in-laws to Stone's greed. My wife carries scars from a fire that was meant to kill her. I'm done waiting for someone else to fix this. I'm in, Jonas said. Me too, said Maria. One by one they spoke, each voice adding to the chorus, each person choosing to stand. Jacob looked at Clara. This woman who had been hanging from a rope 3 days ago, who should have been dead, who had walked through a blizzard to find him because she believed in something bigger than her own survival. You really think this can work? I think it has to. Clara's green eyes held his. Because if it doesn't, everything Henry died for was meaningless. Everything Rachel died for was meaningless. And I refuse to believe that. Jacob held her gaze for a long moment. He saw the fire in her, the determination, the same stubborn refusal to surrender that he'd seen in the best soldiers he'd ever fought beside. All right, he said. Sunday it is. Clara nodded. Then for the first time since he'd cut her down from those oak trees, she smiled. It transformed her face. Made her look younger, softer, like the woman she must have been before grief and terror had stripped everything away. Jacob felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for 4 years, slowly beginning to thaw. We're going to need more guns, Jonas said, breaking the moment. And more people, Samuel added. I know where to find both. Henry moved toward the door. The miners at Silver Star, the ranchers on the North Ridge, the shopkeepers who've been paying protection money to Stone for years. They'll come. When they hear what we're planning, they'll come. And if they don't? Clara asked. Henry looked back at her, and there was something fierce and unbreakable in his weathered face. Then we die trying, but at least we die free. He walked out into the gathering dusk. Samuel followed. Then Jonas, pausing only to grip Jacob's shoulder before he left. Maria began clearing the soup bowls, humming softly to herself. Emma had fallen asleep on a chair by the fire, exhausted by the day's terrors. Jacob and Clara stood alone by the window, watching the last light fade from the Montana sky. "You should rest," Jacob said. "Tomorrow's going to be long." "So should you." "I can't." He stared at his own reflection in the glass. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Emma. I see her in Stone's hands. I see her hanging from a tree like Rachel." Clara moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her beside him. "She's safe now. You got her out." "For how long until Stone finds this farmhouse? Until one of our allies decides $1,000 is worth more than loyalty?" Jacob's voice cracked. "I can't protect her. I couldn't protect Sarah. I couldn't protect Rachel. Everyone I love." "Stop." Clara's hand found his, her fingers still bandaged at the wrists, intertwined with his calloused ones. "You are not cursed, Jacob Mercer. You are not destined to lose everyone. You are a good man who has suffered terrible losses, and you are still standing, still fighting, still choosing to do the right thing even when it costs you everything." Jacob looked at her, at this woman who had lost as much as he had, who had every reason to give up, who was standing here holding his hand like she believed in something he'd stopped believing years ago. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you keep hoping when everything falls apart?" Clara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Because Henry asked me to. In his last letter, he told me to set the truth free. He believed I could do it. He believed I was braver than I thought I was." She squeezed Jacob's hand. "And now I have to prove him right. Not for me, for him, for everyone who died because powerful men thought they could get away with murder. And if we fail, then we fail together." Clara's green eyes held his steady and unafraid. "But we don't fail without trying. We don't fail in silence. We fail standing up, fighting back, making enough noise that the whole territory knows what happened here." Jacob stared at her, at this woman he'd known for 3 days. This woman who had walked through hell and come out the other side still burning. "Clara." "Yes. When this is over, if we survive." He hesitated, not sure how to say what he was feeling. "I'd like to know you, really know you, not as the woman I saved, not as the widow with the ledger, just you." Clara's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something she'd been feeling too. "I'd like that," she said softly. They stood there in the darkness, hands clasped, while the winter wind howled outside and their sleeping daughter dreamed by the fire. Tomorrow would bring danger. Sunday would bring war. But tonight, for one brief moment, Jacob Mercer felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The days before Sunday passed like hours before an execution. Jacob spent every waking moment preparing. He cleaned his Winchester until the barrel gleamed. He counted ammunition. 50 rounds for the rifle, 36 for the Colt. He mapped every entrance and exit of the church in his mind, memorizing angles and distances the way he had memorized battlefields 20 years ago. Clara worked alongside him. She practiced shooting in the barn behind the farmhouse, her bandaged wrists screaming with every recoil, her jaw set against the pain. She missed more than she hit at first, but by the 3rd day, she was putting bullets within inches of the target. "Not bad," Jacob said, watching her reload. "Not good enough." Clara raised the pistol again. "Stone's men won't stand still while I find my aim." She fired. The bullet punched through the center of the wooden target. "Better." Jacob allowed himself a small smile. "Much better." On Saturday night, they gathered in the farmhouse kitchen. All of them, Jonas and Samuel, Henry and Maria, Widow Polk, who had arrived that morning with news from town, and 3 others who had come in secret: Tom Reeves, a rancher whose grazing land had been stolen; Martha Dawson, a seamstress whose husband had died in a mine collapse; and old Moses, the 74-year-old saloon keeper who had seen everything and forgotten nothing. "Stone knows something's coming." Widow Polk's voice was grim. "He's got extra men patrolling the streets, armed guards at every corner. Whatever spies he's got in town, they've been talking. Does he know about Sunday? Clara asked. Can't say for certain, but he's nervous. I've never seen him nervous before. Good. Jacob stood at the head of the table, the ledger open before him. Nervous men make mistakes. Nervous men also shoot first, Jonas said. We walk into that church tomorrow, we might not walk out. Then we don't walk in. Jacob looked around the table. We wait until the service ends, until everyone's outside, until the whole town is gathered in one place. And then Clara reads from the ledger, every name, every crime, every dollar that changed hands. Jacob's voice hardened. And we make damn sure Walter Hudson writes it all down. The telegram had gone out 3 days ago. Hudson had replied within hours. He was coming. The editor of the Montana Gazette was riding through a blizzard because he believed the story was worth the risk. What about Stone? Samuel asked. He won't just stand there while we destroy him. No, he won't. Jacob looked at Jonas. That's where you come in. You and the others. The moment Clara starts reading, Stone's going to try to stop her. I need men who can hold him back. Men who aren't afraid to fight. We've got 12 confirmed, Jonas said. Miners, ranchers, a few shopkeepers. Good men. Men who've lost people to Stone's corruption. 12 against how many? Stone's got maybe 20 hired guns, plus Sheriff Walsh and his deputies. So we're outnumbered. We're always outnumbered. Jonas's dark eyes gleamed. But we've got something they don't. What's that? The truth, and a whole lot of rage. Jacob nodded slowly. He looked around the table at these faces. Ordinary people. Farmers and miners and shopkeepers. People who had every reason to stay home to keep their heads down to let someone else fight this battle. They were here anyway. I won't lie to you, Jacob said. Tomorrow might be the last day for some of us. Maybe all of us. Stone's desperate, and desperate men do desperate things. He paused. But I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And I reckon you feel the same, or you wouldn't be here. Damn right, Tom Reeves said. Whatever happens tomorrow, Clara added, know that it matters. Every one of you. Every sacrifice. Henry believed that one person could make a difference. But he was wrong about one thing. She looked at them, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. It's not one person. It's all of us. Together. The room was silent for a long moment. Then old Moses rose from his chair. He was stooped with age, his hands gnarled like old tree roots, but his voice was steady as stone. I've lived in this territory for 50 years. I've seen good men die and bad men prosper. I've watched justice get bought and sold like cattle. He picked up a glass of whiskey from the table. Tomorrow we take it back. Tomorrow we remember what this country was supposed to be. He raised the glass. One by one the others did the same. To the truth, Moses said. To the truth, they echoed, and they drank. Later that night, Jacob found Clara standing alone on the farmhouse porch. The cold bit deep, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were fixed on the distant mountains, dark shapes against a darker sky. You should be sleeping, he said. So should you. Jacob moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough to give her space. What are you thinking about? Henry. Clara's voice was soft. I keep wondering what he would say if he could see us now. All these people willing to risk everything because of a book he wrote. He'd be proud. Would he? Clara turned to look at him. Or would he be horrified I'm asking people to put their lives on the line? Some of them might die tomorrow. Because of me. Because of this crusade I've dragged them into. You didn't drag anyone, Clara. They chose to be here. They chose to fight. Did they? Or did I just give them a convenient excuse to throw their lives away? Jacob was quiet for a moment. He thought about all the men he'd led into battle during the war. The ones who came back. The ones who didn't. At Chickamauga, he said slowly. I commanded a unit of 12 scouts. We were supposed to hold a ridge against a Confederate advance. Buy time for the main army to retreat. What happened? We held, for 6 hours, against 300 men. Jacob's voice grew distant, remembering. When it was over, only 4 of us were standing, 8 good men dead in the dirt. Jacob! For years I blamed myself. I was the one who gave the order to hold. I was the one who told them to keep fighting when running would have saved their lives. He looked at her, but eventually I realized something. Those men knew what they were doing. They knew the risks, and they chose to stay anyway. Not because I ordered them to, but because they believed in something worth dying for. Clara's eyes glistened in the darkness. The people in that kitchen, Jacob continued, they're not fools. They know what tomorrow might cost them. And they're here because Stone took something from every single one of them. Family, land, justice, hope. He reached out, took her hand. You're not leading lambs to slaughter, Clara. You're giving wolves a chance to hunt. Clara stared at him. At this man who had lost so much, who had every reason to hide, who was standing here holding her hand like an anchor in a storm. How do you do it? She whispered. How do you keep going when everything hurts? I think about Emma, about the kind of world I want her to grow up in. Jacob squeezed her hand. And now I think about you, about finishing what Henry started, about making sure none of this was for nothing. Clara stepped closer, close enough that he could see the tears tracking down her cheeks. I'm scared, Jacob. I know, so am I. What if we fail? Then we fail together. He reached up, brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. But we don't fail without a fight. We don't fail in silence, and we don't fail alone. Clara closed her eyes. For a moment she just stood there, feeling his hand on her face, feeling the warmth of him beside her. Then she opened her eyes and stepped back. Tomorrow, she said. We finish this tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. She walked back inside, leaving Jacob alone with the cold and the stars and the weight of everything that was coming. He stayed on the porch until dawn. Sunday morning broke gray and bitter. They rode into Silver Ridge in 2s and 3s, arriving from different directions to avoid suspicion. Jacob and Clara came last with Emma tucked between them on the wagon seat. The girl clutched her cloth doll tight, her brown eyes scanning the street for danger. Remember what I told you, Jacob said quietly. When the shooting starts, you run to Mrs. Polk's cellar. You don't stop. You don't look back. I remember, Papa. Promise me. Emma looked up at him with those 2 old eyes. I promise. But you have to promise too. Promise what? That you'll come back. That you won't leave me like Mama did. Jacob's throat tightened. He pulled Emma close, pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I promise, Princess. I'll come back. The church bells began to ring. They filed in with the rest of the congregation. Stone's men were everywhere, just as Widow Polk had warned. Armed guards at the doors. Hired guns scattered through the pews. Sheriff Walsh standing at the front like a vulture waiting for carrion. Marshal Stone himself sat in the first row. His right hand was still bandaged, still healing from Jacob's bullet. His slate-colored eyes swept the crowd searching. When they found Jacob, something dark flickered behind them. The service passed in a blur. Hymns and prayers and scripture that Jacob barely heard. He was too busy counting. 8 guards inside the church, 4 more at the doors. Stone, Walsh, at least a dozen hired guns. They were outnumbered, outgunned. This was suicide. But they had come too far to turn back now. The final hymn ended. Pastor Morrison raised his hands in blessing. Go in peace, he said, and may God's grace wait. Clara's voice cut through the church like a blade. Every head turned. Every eye found her. She stood in the center aisle, the black leather ledger clutched against her chest, her green eyes blazing with something that made even Stone's hired guns hesitate. I have something to say. Mrs. Bennet. Pastor Morrison's face went pale. This isn't... I know what this isn't, Pastor. It isn't safe. It isn't proper. It isn't what anyone expected. Clara's voice grew stronger. But it is the truth. And the truth has been silent in this town for far too long. Stone rose from his pew. His voice cracked like a whip. This woman is a federal criminal. She stole court documents and fled from lawful custody. Whatever she's about to say is lies and slander. Then let her say it. Walter Hudson stepped forward from the back of the church. The newspaper editor was a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, but his voice carried clear and strong. If it's lies, they'll be exposed as lies. If it's truth... He looked at Stone. Well, that's what newspapers are for. This is not a courthouse, Stone growled. No, it's better. Clara walked toward the front of the church past the pews full of watching eyes past the hired guns with their hands on their pistols. In a courthouse, evidence can be suppressed. Witnesses can be silenced. Judges can be bought. She stopped at the altar and turned to face the congregation. But here, in front of all of you, there's nowhere to hide. She opened the ledger. March 15, 1879, the Sandoval family. Eduardo Sandoval, his wife Rosa, their children Miguel and Ana, refused to sell their ranch for the Northern Pacific Rail Line. Clara's voice was steady, relentless. All four died in a house fire caused by an overturned oil lamp. Marshal Caleb Stone received $3,000 to ensure no investigation was conducted. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Maria Dawson had tears streaming down her face. Henry gripped her hand so tight his knuckles went white. October 1881. Michael O'Brien, miner at Silver Star, demanded safer working conditions, died in a tunnel collapse. Clara turned a page. $2,000 paid to Mayor Amos Pritchard to declare the death accidental. More gasps, more whispers. The hired guns were looking at each other uncertainly now, hands still on their weapons, but eyes full of doubt. Enough. Stone strode toward the altar. I will not stand here and let this woman... Sit down, Caleb. The voice came from the back of the church. Every head turned. Widow Polk stood in the doorway, her weathered face hard as iron. Behind her stood a dozen men and women, miners, ranchers, shopkeepers, people Stone had terrorized for years. We've been silent long enough, Widow Polk continued. We've watched our families get hurt, our land get stolen, our friends disappear, and we've said nothing because we were afraid. She stepped forward into the church. I'm done being afraid. So am I, said Tom Reeves, stepping up beside her. And me, said Martha Dawson. One by one they spoke. One by one they stood, until the back of the church was filled with people who had finally found their voices. Stone's face had gone white. He looked at his hired guns at Walsh at the deputies. They were shifting nervously, glancing at each other at the growing crowd at the exits. This is insurrection, Stone hissed. You're all going to hang. The only one hanging today is you, Marshal. Jacob stepped forward, Winchester in his hands. For murder, for corruption, for the betrayal of everything you swore to protect. You shot a federal marshal. You kidnapped a prisoner. I saved an innocent woman from being lynched by a mob you organized. Jacob's voice was ice. And I've got 50 witnesses who'll testify to that in court. Stone's hand moved toward his pistol. Don't. Jonas's hammer appeared at Stone's temple, the heavy iron head pressing against his skull. I'm real curious what the inside of your head looks like, Marshal. But I'd rather find out in a courtroom than on this church floor. Stone froze. For a long moment, no one moved. The entire church held its breath. Then Stone laughed. A cold, bitter sound that echoed off the wooden walls. You think this changes anything? You think the railroad cares about one marshal? One ledger? He looked at Clara with something like pity. They'll send more men. They'll burn this town to the ground. They'll kill everyone who stood up today and salt the earth where you're buried." "Maybe," Clara said, "but they can't kill the truth. Not once it's printed in every newspaper from here to Washington." And that's exactly what's going to happen. Hudson had been writing furiously in his notebook. Now he looked up, spectacles gleaming. "This story runs in tomorrow's edition. By the end of the week, every paper in the territory will be carrying it. By the end of the month, Congress will be asking questions." Stone's face twisted with rage. He looked at Walsh, at his deputies, at the hired guns who were slowly backing away. "Arrest them. All of them. That's an order." Walsh didn't move. "Sheriff?" Stone's voice cracked. "I said arrest them." "I heard you." Walsh looked at Stone, then at the congregation, then at the ledger in Clara's hands. "But I reckon I'm done taking orders from murderers." He pulled off his badge and dropped it on the floor. "You coward!" Stone lunged forward, but Jonas's hammer caught him across the jaw. The marshal crumpled unconscious before he hit the ground. Chaos erupted. 3 of Stone's hired guns drew their weapons. Jacob fired before they could aim. The Winchester's roar deafening in the enclosed space. 1 man fell. Samuel tackled another. Tom Reeves drove his fist into the 3rd man's face. The congregation scattered screaming. Hudson grabbed Clara and pulled her behind the altar. Emma ran for the side door, just like her father had told her, clutching her cloth doll as bullets whined overhead. Jacob moved through the chaos like a ghost. He'd done this before. Chickamauga, Chattanooga, Atlanta. The body remembered what the mind wanted to forget. He fired, moved, fired again. A bullet grazed his shoulder. He barely felt it. Another man went down, then another, and then it was over. The church was filled with smoke and the groans of wounded men. Stone lay unconscious on the floor, his hired guns either fled or subdued. Sheriff Walsh stood guard over the prisoners, his own pistol drawn, his face grim with the weight of choices made. Jacob found Emma first. She was huddled in the side doorway, unharmed but trembling. "Papa." He swept her into his arms, held her tight, felt her heartbeat against his chest. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "Always, Princess. Always." Then he looked for Clara. She was kneeling beside the altar, the ledger still clutched against her chest. Hudson stood over her, his notebook filled with pages of evidence that would shake the territory to its foundations. Jacob walked to her, reached down, helped her to her feet. "It's over," he said. "No." Clara looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes, but also something else, something bright and fierce and unbreakable. "It's just beginning." She turned to face the congregation, those who had stayed, those who had fought, those who had finally found the courage to stand. "My husband died for this truth," she said. "He believed that law could be more than words on paper, that justice could be more than a dream, that one person—" Her voice broke. She took a breath. "That many people standing together could make a difference." She held up the ledger. "This book contains 12 years of evidence, every bribe, every murder, every betrayal. It belongs to all of you now, to Silver Ridge, to Montana, to everyone who ever believed that the truth matters more than power." She looked at Jacob, at Emma still in his arms, at Jonas and Samuel and Henry and Maria and all the others who had risked everything. "Henry was wrong about one thing," Clara continued. "He thought he had to fight alone. But he was never alone. None of us are. Not when we stand together. Not when we refuse to be silent." Pastor Morrison stepped forward. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "The Lord says, 'The truth shall set you free.'" He looked at Clara with something like awe. "I think, Mrs. Bennett, that you have given this town its freedom back." Clara shook her head. I didn't give anyone anything. You took it. All of you. You chose to fight. You chose to speak. You chose to be free. The doors burst open. Federal marshals poured into the church. Real marshals in blue uniforms with silver stars on their chests. Behind them came more men on horseback surrounding the building. Nobody move. The lead marshal, a grizzled man in his 50s, strode down the aisle. We received word of a disturbance, multiple reports of gunfire. He stopped at the altar, looked at Stone's unconscious body, at the subdued hired guns, at the congregation full of people holding makeshift weapons. Can someone explain what the hell happened here? Clara stepped forward. I can, Marshal. My name is Clara Bennett, widow of Federal Judge Henry Bennett. She held up the ledger. And I have evidence of corruption, murder, and conspiracy involving Marshal Caleb Stone, Mayor Amos Pritchard, and senior officials of the Northern Pacific Railroad. The federal marshal stared at her, then at the ledger, then at the chaos around them. Ma'am, he said slowly, I think you better start from the beginning. I will. Clara looked at Jacob one more time, at this man who had saved her life, who had risked everything, who had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. But first, I need to say something. She walked to him, to Jacob and Emma standing together in the aftermath of battle. Thank you, she said, for not looking away, for being brave when it would have been easier to be safe. Jacob looked at her, at this woman who had been hanging from a rope 5 days ago, who had walked through hell and come out the other side still burning. I should be thanking you, he said. You reminded me who I used to be, before I got scared, before I forgot what mattered. Emma looked between them with those two old eyes. Then she reached out and took Clara's hand. You can stay with us, the girl said. If you want. Papa gets lonely sometimes. He pretends he doesn't, but I know. Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. She knelt so she was eye level with Emma. I think I'd like that, she said softly. Very much. Jacob's hand found Clara's shoulder, warm, steady, real. Outside, the winter sun was breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. Its light streamed through the church windows, falling on the altar, on the congregation, on 3 people who had lost everything and found each other. The federal marshal cleared his throat. Mrs. Bennett, that evidence. Clara rose, wiped her eyes, and turned to face him. The softness was gone from her expression, replaced by the steel that had carried her through hanging ropes and blizzards and hired guns. Of course, Marshal. She handed him the ledger. You'll find everything you need in here. Names, dates, payments, proof of conspiracy reaching from Silver Ridge to the boardrooms of the Northern Pacific Railroad. The marshal took the ledger, opened it. His eyes widened as he read. God Almighty, he breathed. God had nothing to do with it, Clara said. Men did this. Evil men with too much money and too little conscience. She looked at Stone, still unconscious on the floor. And now it's time for justice. Real justice. The kind that can't be bought. The marshal nodded slowly. He closed the ledger and handed it to one of his men. Take Marshal Stone into custody and find Mayor Pritchard. He's under arrest too. He looked at Clara with something like respect. Mrs. Bennett, you're going to need to come to Helena. Give a formal statement. Testify before a federal court. I know. Clara glanced at Jacob. We'll be there. Mr. Mercer is my associate. He has information about Stone's operations, and about a lynching in Arizona territory that may be connected to the same network of corruption. The federal marshal looked at Jacob, took in the Winchester, the military bearing the scars of old battles. You the one who shot Stone's hand? Yes, sir. Good shooting. The marshal almost smiled. We'll need your testimony too. But something tells me you weren't planning on running. No, sir, I'm done running. The marshal nodded. Then he turned and began giving orders. Men in blue uniforms moved through the church, taking prisoners, collecting weapons, restoring order to chaos. Jacob put his arm around Clara's shoulders. She leaned into him, exhausted, triumphant, alive. What happens now? She asked. Now. Jacob looked at Emma, who had fallen asleep against his leg, her cloth doll clutched tight. Now we go home, we rest, and tomorrow we start building something new. What kind of something? Jacob thought about it. About the farmhouse in the valley. About the life he had imagined before Stone's men had come. About the future that had seemed impossible 5 days ago. A life, he said finally. A real one, with people worth fighting for. Clara looked up at him. Her green eyes were soft now, the fire banked but not extinguished. I'd like that, she said. Very much. They walked out of the church together into the cold Montana morning, into a world that was finally starting to heal. The wagon rolled north toward Helena 3 days after the confrontation at the church. Clara sat beside Jacob on the driver's seat, the ledger wrapped in oilcloth and tucked beneath the blankets behind them. Emma slept in the wagon bed, exhausted from days of hiding and running and watching adults fight battles she was too young to understand. You're quiet, Clara said. Thinking. About what? Jacob was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough as gravel. Stone. What he said in the church. About the railroad sending more men. He was trying to scare us. He was telling the truth. Jacob's jaw tightened. Men like Stone don't work alone. There's always someone above them, someone with deeper pockets and fewer scruples. Clara looked at him. At the lines carved around his eyes. At the gray at his temples. At the weight he carried on his shoulders. You think this isn't over? I think it's just beginning. Jacob snapped the reins, urging the horses faster. The railroad lost a lot of money because of that ledger. They're going to want payback. Let them come. Clara's voice was steel. We beat them once. We can beat them again. We got lucky once. Luck doesn't hold forever. It wasn't luck, Jacob. Clara reached over and placed her hand on his arm. It was people. Good people who decided to fight back. That's not luck. That's courage. Jacob looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face, at those green eyes that had burned bright even when she was hanging from a rope dying between 2 oak trees. You really believe that? Henry believed it. He spent 12 years gathering evidence because he believed one man could make a difference. Clara squeezed his arm. He was wrong about the one-man part, but he was right about everything else. Before Jacob could respond, Emma's voice drifted up from the wagon bed. Are we there yet? Clara smiled despite everything. Not yet, sweetheart. A few more hours. I'm hungry. There's bread in the basket, and some dried apples. Emma sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She looked at Clara, then at her father, then at Clara's hand still resting on Jacob's arm. Are you two going to get married? Jacob nearly choked. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Emma, Jacob said, that's not... Mrs. Peterson at school says when a man and a woman travel together, they should be married. Otherwise, it's improper. Mrs. Peterson should mind her own business, Jacob muttered. But are you... Clara turned to face the girl. Emma's brown eyes were curious, but not unkind. There was something else there, too. Hope, maybe. Or the desperate wish of a child who had lost her mother and was looking for something to fill that empty space. Your father and I have only known each other for a few days, Clara said gently. Marriage is a big decision. It takes time. Mama and Papa knew each other for 3 weeks before they got married. Papa told me. Jacob's face flushed. That was different. How? It just was. Emma crossed her arms. That's not an answer. Clara laughed. She couldn't help it. This fierce little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, demanding explanations from adults who didn't have any. You're right, Clara said. It's not an answer. The truth is, I don't know what's going to happen between your father and me. But I know this: whatever happens, I care about both of you. Very much. Emma considered this. Then she nodded slowly, apparently satisfied. Okay. Can I have some of those dried apples now? Help yourself, princess, Jacob said, and there was relief in his voice. Emma climbed over the seat to reach the food basket. As she did, she paused beside Clara. I like you, she said quietly. You're brave, like Mama was. Then she was gone, rummaging through the basket, leaving Clara with tears in her eyes and a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. They reached Helena on the 4th day. The territorial capital was larger than Silver Ridge, more civilized. Brick buildings lined the main street. Telegraph wires crisscrossed overhead. The smell of coal smoke and horse manure filled the air. Federal Marshal Thompson met them at the courthouse steps. He was the same grizzled man who had taken Stone into custody, and his face was grim. We've got a problem, he said without preamble. Jacob's hand moved toward his pistol. What kind of problem? The kind with lawyers. Thompson spat on the ground. Railroad company sent 3 of them from back east. Fancy suits, fancier words. They're claiming Stone was acting alone, that the company had no knowledge of his activities. That's a lie, Clara said. The ledger proves Stone took money. It doesn't prove who gave it to him. Thompson's eyes were tired. These railroad lawyers, they're good at what they do. They've been tying up courts for years, burying evidence, making witnesses disappear. Making witnesses disappear. Jacob's voice went cold. Is that a threat? It's a warning. You 2 are the only people who can connect Stone to the railroad directly. Mrs. Bennett's testimony about the ledger, your testimony about what Stone said at the hanging. Thompson looked at them both. If something happened to you before the trial, nothing's going to happen to us, Clara said firmly. I hope you're right. Thompson didn't sound convinced. The trial starts tomorrow. Judge Morrison is presiding. Good man. Fair. But even he can't protect you outside this courthouse. We don't need protection, Jacob said. We need justice. Thompson studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I've seen a lot of men walk into this courthouse, Mr. Mercer. Most of them are looking for something: money, power, revenge. He paused. You're the first one I've met who actually seems to want what you say you want. Is that a problem? No. Thompson almost smiled. It's just rare. The trial began the next morning. Clara sat in the witness box, the ledger open before her, reading entry after entry into the court record. Stone's crimes, Pritchard's crimes, the railroad's crimes, names and dates and dollar amounts that painted a picture of corruption so vast it seemed almost unbelievable. The railroad lawyers objected constantly. Relevance, hearsay, lack of foundation. Judge Morrison overruled them every time. This evidence was gathered by a federal judge over the course of 12 years. Morrison said, his voice sharp as a knife, "It will be heard." Clara read for 3 hours. By the time she finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the railroad lawyers had stopped objecting. They just sat there, faces pale, realizing that all their fancy words couldn't bury this much truth. Jacob testified next. He told the court about finding Clara hanging between the 2 oak trees, about Stone's threats, about the hired guns sent to kill them, about everything that had happened from the moment he pulled the trigger to the moment the federal marshals arrived. "Mr. Mercer," the lead railroad lawyer said during cross-examination, "you shot a federal marshal. You kidnapped a prisoner in custody. You incited a riot in a church. By your own admission, you've killed at least 3 men in the past week." "Yes, sir." "And you expect this court to believe you're the hero of this story." Jacob looked at him. At this man in his expensive suit and his polished shoes, who had probably never fired a gun or buried a sister or watched a town suffer under the boot of corruption. "I don't expect anything," Jacob said. "I'm just telling you what happened. You can decide for yourself what kind of man I am. What kind of man shoots a federal marshal? The kind who won't stand by while an innocent woman gets lynched. Jacob's voice never wavered. The kind who's tired of looking away while good people die and bad people prosper. The kind who decided maybe too late that some things are worth fighting for. The lawyer opened his mouth to respond. Then he closed it. Then he sat down. The verdict came 3 days later. Caleb Stone, guilty of corruption conspiracy and accessory to murder, sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Amos Pritchard, guilty of corruption and conspiracy, sentenced to 15 years. Sheriff Walsh charges dropped in exchange for testimony. Given a dishonorable discharge and banned from holding public office. The railroad lawyers filed an appeal immediately. They would keep filing appeals for years, tying the case up in courts, spending millions of dollars to avoid accountability. But it didn't matter. Walter Hudson's story ran in the Montana Gazette the day after the verdict. Within a week, it had been picked up by newspapers across the country. The New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the San Francisco Chronicle. Everyone was talking about the corrupt marshal, the brave widow, the mysterious shopkeeper who had saved her life. Congress launched an investigation. Railroad executives resigned. Stock prices plummeted. The truth, as Henry had written in his final letter, was like a lion. Once set free, it defended itself. 2 weeks after the trial, Clara and Jacob stood on the steps of the Helena courthouse. "What now?" Clara asked. Jacob looked at her. At this woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side still standing. At this woman who had given him back something he thought he'd lost forever. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about the farmhouse. Henry Dawson's place, the one where we hid before the confrontation." "What about it?" "Henry says he's selling, moving to California. Wants to start fresh somewhere that doesn't remind him of everything he lost." Jacob paused. "I've got some money saved. From the store, from before." Clara's breath caught. "Jacob?" "It's good land, 80 acres, creek running through the middle, room for horses, room for cattle." He looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his gray eyes, something he'd kept hidden for a long time. Room for a family. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you'd consider staying, with me, with Emma." Jacob's voice cracked. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving. I know I'm just a shopkeeper with too many scars and a daughter who asks too many questions. But—" Clara kissed him. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just stepped forward and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his words, cutting off his doubts, cutting off everything except this moment. Jacob froze for half a second. Then his arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with a desperation that told her he'd been waiting for this, wanting, this afraid to hope for this. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Clara was smiling. "Is that a yes?" Jacob asked. "That's a yes." From somewhere behind them, Emma's voice rang out. "I knew it! I knew they were going to get married!" Clara laughed. Jacob groaned. And somewhere in the heavens, Henry Bennett and Sarah Mercer and Rachel Mercer were probably smiling. They bought the farmhouse in March. The winter had finally broken, and the first hints of spring were showing in the Montana valleys. Green shoots pushing through brown earth. Birds returning from their southern migration. The smell of new growth in the air. Jacob built a sign for the gate, carved each letter himself the way his father had taught him. Bennett Mercer Ranch. Below, in smaller letters, "Where truth runs free." "You sure about the name?" Clara asked, watching him hang it. "Your husband started this fight. Seems right he should be part of how it ends." Clara touched the sign, ran her fingers over Henry's name. "He would have liked you," she said softly. "You're everything he believed in. Courage, justice, doing the right thing even when it's hard. I wish I could have met him." "You did, in a way." Clara smiled through her tears. Everything I am now, everything I've become, it's because of what he taught me. When you saved me, you saved him too. His legacy, his dream. Jacob pulled her close, held her while she cried, let her grieve what she'd lost while celebrating what she'd found. That was the thing about healing he'd learned. It wasn't a straight line. It was messy and complicated and full of setbacks. But as long as you kept moving forward, as long as you had someone to hold you when the darkness came, you could survive just about anything. Emma took to ranch life like she was born for it. She learned to ride horses from Maria Dawson, who visited every week to help with the livestock. She learned to cook from Clara standing on a stool to reach the stove flour dusted across her cheeks. She learned to shoot from her father the way he'd learned from his father, the way generations of Mercers had learned before them. "She's growing up so fast," Clara said one evening watching Emma race her horse across the south pasture. "Too fast." Jacob's voice was thick. "Sometimes I look at her, and I still see the baby Sarah put in my arms. 5 pounds 3 ounces, screaming her lungs out. She has her mother's spirit. She has yours too, now." Jacob looked at Clara. The stubbornness, the fire, the refusal to give up even when everything's falling apart. Clara smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one." They watched Emma ride in silence. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The kind of beauty that made you believe just for a moment that the world might actually be a good place. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "The store. The life you had before. If you hadn't saved me, you'd still have all of that. The house in Silver Ridge, the customers who knew your name, the routine." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and certain. "I had a life before you. A safe life. A small life. I woke up every morning, I opened the store. I counted inventory. I went to sleep. And every single day I felt like I was dying." Clara turned to look at him. "When I saw you hanging from those trees, something woke up inside me. Something I thought I'd buried with Rachel." Jacob met her eyes. "You gave me a reason to fight again. A reason to believe again. I wouldn't trade that for 100 stores. Even with everything we've been through, the danger, the violence, the uncertainty. Especially because of that." Jacob took her hand. "I'd rather have 1 year of really living than 50 years of just existing. And being with you, being part of this. It's the first time I've felt alive since Sarah died." Clara squeezed his hand. No words needed. Some things were too big for words. The visitor came in April. Clara was in the kitchen making bread when she heard the horse approaching. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, expecting to see Jonas or Maria or one of the other friends who dropped by regularly. Instead, she saw a young man, mid-20s, dark hair, slate-colored eyes that she recognized immediately. Daniel Stone. Clara's hand moved toward the rifle by the door. "Please." Daniel held up his hands. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I needed to see you." "Why?" "Because I need to understand." Daniel's voice cracked. "My father is going to die in prison. Everything I thought I knew about him was a lie, and you're the only one who can help me make sense of it." Clara studied him. Caleb Stone's son, the boy who had grown up in San Francisco, who had cut all ties with his father, who had only learned the truth when the newspapers splashed it across their front pages. She lowered her hand from the rifle. "Come inside." They sat at the kitchen table while Daniel talked. About his childhood. About the father he remembered. About the man who had taught him to ride horses and read books and believe in justice. "He wasn't always a monster," Daniel said, tears streaming down his face. "He used to be good. He used to believe in the law. What happened to him?" "Fear." Clara's voice was gentle. "The railroad threatened his family. Your mother. You. He thought he was protecting you by doing what they wanted. That doesn't excuse what he did. No, it doesn't. Clara reached across the table and took Daniel's hand. But it explains it. And sometimes understanding why someone fell is the first step toward forgiving them. How can I forgive him after everything? I didn't say it would be easy or fast. Clara thought about Henry, about the rage she'd felt after his death, about the long, slow process of turning that rage into purpose. Forgiveness isn't about saying what they did was okay. It's about refusing to let their sins poison the rest of your life. Daniel looked at her with those slate-colored eyes, so like his father's, so full of pain. Did you forgive him? My father. Clara was quiet for a long moment. I'm trying, she said finally. Every day I wake up and I try. Some days are easier than others. Some days I still want to scream. But I keep trying because the alternative is living with hatred in my heart. And hatred is a poison that only hurts the person carrying it. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't seem convinced, but he seemed willing to consider it. I'm going to visit him, he said. In prison. I haven't seen him since everything happened. That's good. I don't know what I'll say. You don't have to know. Sometimes just showing up is enough. Daniel rose from the table. He looked around the kitchen at the home Clara and Jacob had built, at the life that had grown from the ashes of so much destruction. Thank you, he said, for talking to me, for not turning me away. You're not your father, Daniel. His sins are not yours to carry. Sometimes it feels like they are. I know. Clara walked him to the door. But you get to choose who you become. That's the one thing no one can take from you. Daniel mounted his horse. He looked down at Clara, and there was something new in his eyes. Not hope exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. Mrs. Bennett? Yes. My father. In his letters he talks about your husband, about Judge Bennett. He says he was the best man he ever knew. Daniel paused. I think he was right. Then he rode away, disappearing down the road toward whatever future he would build for himself. Jacob found Clara standing on the porch, watching the dust settle. Who was that? Daniel Stone, Caleb's son. Jacob tensed. What did he want? Answers. The same thing we all want. Clara leaned against him, let him wrap his arm around her shoulders. He's going to visit his father in prison. Do you think it'll help? I don't know, but I think he needs to try. Clara looked up at Jacob. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, even the people we've written off. That's very generous. Henry used to say that mercy isn't about giving people what they deserve. It's about giving them what they need to become better. Wise man, you're Henry. He was. Clara smiled. You would have liked him. I think I already do. Through you. Emma came running up from the barn, her face flushed with excitement. Papa, Miss Clara. One of the mares is having her foal. Come quick. They followed her to the barn, where Maria was already kneeling beside the laboring horse. For the next hour, they watched new life come into the world. A healthy colt, with its mother's brown coat and its father's white markings. Emma was transfixed. What are we going to name him? That's your choice, princess, Jacob said. Emma thought about it, looked at the colt, looked at her father, looked at Clara. Hope, she said. I want to name him Hope. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. Jacob squeezed her hand. Hope it is, he said. That night, after Emma was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Clara and Jacob sat on the porch watching the stars. Do you ever think about what might have been? Clara asked. If things had gone differently. What do you mean? If you hadn't been on that road when Stone was hanging me. If you'd looked away, like you had for 6 years. If you just kept riding. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Every day, he said finally. I think about it every day, and every day I'm grateful I didn't. Why? Because this life right here, right now. Jacob gestured at the ranch, at the mountains, at the woman beside him. This is better than anything I could have imagined. Better than I deserve. You deserve everything good that happens to you, Jacob Mercer. So do you, Clara Bennett. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her. I used to dream about Henry, Clara said softly. Every night after he died. He'd come to me and we'd talk just like we used to. Sometimes I'd wake up crying because the dreams felt more real than my life. And now I still dream about him sometimes. But it's different. He's not sad anymore. He's not worried. He just smiles, like he's happy I found my way. Maybe he is? You think so? Jacob looked at her. At this woman who had lost everything and found the strength to rebuild. At this woman who had taught him that courage wasn't about being unafraid, but about choosing to act despite the fear. I think the people we love never really leave us, he said. I think they stay with us in our hearts, in our choices, in the way we live our lives. And I think when we find happiness again, they're happy too. Clara kissed him, soft and sweet, like a promise. I love you, Jacob Mercer. It was the first time she'd said the words. They had danced around them for weeks, shown them through actions and gestures and silent understanding. But this was the first time they'd been spoken aloud. Jacob felt his heart swell with something he thought he'd never feel again. I love you too, Clara Bennett. They sat there on the porch, holding each other, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the barn, Hope the colt was sleeping beside his mother. Somewhere in the house, Emma was dreaming of horses and adventures. And somewhere in the heavens, Henry Bennett and Sarah Mercer were smiling down at the family that had risen from the ashes of so much loss. The trial was over. The villains were punished. The truth was free. But more than that, something new had been born. Something fragile and precious and worth fighting for. A family. A home. A future. And for the first time in a very long time, Clara Bennett looked at the road ahead and saw not darkness, but light. 1 year passed on the Bennett Mercer ranch. Clara woke every morning to the sound of horses in the pasture and Emma's laughter drifting up from the barn. She made breakfast while Jacob checked the livestock. They ate together at the kitchen table, the three of them, like they had done it all their lives. Some days, Clara still expected to wake up and find it was all a dream, that she was back in the cabin alone, waiting for men with guns to find her, that the ropes were still around her wrists, the cold still biting into her bones. But then Jacob would smile at her across the table, or Emma would ask for help with her schoolwork, or Hope the colt would nick her at the barn door demanding attention, and Clara would remember that this was real, that she had survived, that she had built something beautiful from the ashes of everything she'd lost. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard the horse approaching. A messenger from town, dust-covered and breathless, holding out a yellow envelope. Mrs. Bennett Mercer. Clara took the telegram with trembling hands. No one sent telegrams with good news. She tore it open, read the words, read them again. Then she sat down hard on the porch steps, the laundry forgotten, the world spinning around her. Jacob found her there, 10 minutes later. Clara. What happened? What's wrong? She handed him the telegram without speaking. He read it aloud, his voice growing quieter with each word. To Clara Bennett Mercer. Stop. The United States Congress has voted to award the late Judge Henry Bennett the Congressional Medal of Honor for his service to justice. Stop. A ceremony will be held in Washington, D.C. on June 15th. Stop. Your presence is requested. Stop. President Chester Arthur will present the medal personally. Stop. Jacob looked up from the paper. Clara. They want to give him a medal. Her voice cracked. After everything. After he died alone thinking he'd failed. They want to give him a medal. He didn't fail. Jacob knelt beside her, took her hands in his. He never failed. He just didn't live to see his victory. It's not fair. Tears streamed down Clara's face. He should be here. He should be the one going to Washington. He should be the one standing in front of the president. He will be there. Jacob touched her cheek, wiped away a tear. He'll be there through you, through everything you did to finish what he started. Clara looked at him, at this man who had saved her life and then helped her save so many others, at this man who understood loss and grief and the long, hard road to healing. Will you come with me? To Washington? Yes. Jacob smiled, that quiet smile that still made her heart skip after a year of seeing it every day. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. They traveled by train. The Northern Pacific Line that had once been their enemy now carried them east through mountains and plains and cities that Clara had only read about in books. Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the world rush by, asking questions about everything she saw. Is that a buffalo? I think it's a cow, sweetheart. It looked like a buffalo. Papa, can we get a buffalo for the ranch? Where would we put a buffalo? In the barn, with Hope. I don't think Hope would appreciate that. Clara laughed, and the sound surprised her. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined laughing. Couldn't have imagined feeling anything but pain and fear and rage. Now she was on a train with her family heading to Washington to receive a medal for the man she'd loved and lost. Life was strange, and sometimes strangely wonderful. They reached Washington, D.C. on a warm June morning. The city was overwhelming. Carriages and people everywhere. Buildings taller than anything Clara had ever seen. The Capitol dome rising against the blue sky like something from a fairy tale. It's so big, Emma whispered, clutching Jacob's hand. It's just a city princess. The people here put their pants on one leg at a time, same as everyone else. Even the president. Especially the president. The ceremony was held in the White House. Clara wore a black dress, the same one she'd worn to Henry's funeral. It felt right somehow. This was still a kind of goodbye, a final closing of the chapter that had defined her life for so long. President Arthur was shorter than she'd expected, rounder, with mutton chop whiskers that made him look like a friendly grandfather rather than the leader of a nation. Mrs. Bennett Mercer. He took her hand, his grip warm and firm. I've read about your husband's work. Remarkable man. Remarkable courage. Thank you, Mr. President. The medal we're awarding today is usually given to soldiers, men who fight on battlefields. But your husband fought a different kind of war. A war against corruption, against injustice, against the men who think they can buy the law like they buy cattle. The president's eyes grew serious. He may not have carried a rifle, but he was a soldier all the same. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. He would have been honored to hear you say that, sir. I suspect he hears it. The president smiled. The dead have a way of staying close to the people who loved them. The ceremony was brief, but powerful. A general read a citation describing Henry's work. A congressman spoke about the importance of honest judges, and then the president himself pinned the medal to a velvet cushion and placed it in Clara's hands. For Judge Henry Bennett, Arthur said, who gave his life so that the truth could live. Clara held the medal, felt the weight of it, the cold metal warming in her palms. Thank you, Henry, she whispered. I hope I made you proud. Afterward, there was a reception. Politicians and reporters and important people whose names Clara forgot as soon as she heard them. She smiled and shook hands and answered the same questions over and over. Yes, she had been married to the judge. Yes, she had nearly been killed. Yes, she was the one who had exposed the corruption. No, she didn't consider herself a hero. Then what do you consider yourself? A reporter asked, pencil poised over his notebook. Clara thought about it, about everything she'd been through, about the woman she was before and the woman she'd become. A survivor, she said finally, and a widow who loved her husband enough to finish what he started. The reporter wrote it down. Clara suspected it would be on the front page tomorrow. She didn't care. Jacob found her on the White House balcony staring out at the city lights. "Emma's asleep," he said. "Wore herself out asking the president about Buffalo." Clara laughed. "She didn't." "She did. Asked him if the White House had any buffalo. He said they used to roam the lawn, but the groundskeeper complained." "That can't be true." "Probably not." But she believed him. Jacob moved to stand beside her. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know." Clara looked down at the medal still clutched in her hands. "I thought this would feel like an ending, like closure, but it just feels like another chapter." "Maybe that's what it is. Not an ending, but a turning point." "What do you mean?" "Your life with Henry is over. Nothing can change that. But your life isn't over." Jacob took her hand. "You have a future, Clara. A future with me, with Emma, with the ranch. Henry's story ended, but yours is still being written." Clara looked at him, at this man who had ridden through a blizzard to save a stranger, who had risked everything because he believed in something bigger than himself. "When did you become so wise?" "I'm not wise, I just love you." Jacob squeezed her hand. "And when you love someone, you want them to be happy, even when happiness feels impossible." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I am happy," she said softly. "That's the strange part. I'm grieving and celebrating and terrified and hopeful all at the same time. I didn't know you could feel so many things at once. That's called being alive." Jacob wrapped his arm around her. "It's messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it's also beautiful, and it's worth fighting for." They stood there together, watching the lights of Washington twinkle below them. Two people who had lost everything and found each other. Two people who had walked through fire and come out the other side still standing. "Let's go home," Clara said. "Yeah," Jacob smiled. "Let's go home." They returned to Montana in early July. The ranch was exactly as they'd left it, but somehow it felt different. Warmer, more alive, like their journey had changed not just them, but the very land they called home. Jonas was waiting on the porch when they arrived. His face was grim. "We've got trouble." Jacob's hand moved to his pistol. Old habits died hard. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind with railroad money." Jonas jerked his head toward the house. "There's a man inside. Says he's from the Northern Pacific. Says he wants to talk." Clara felt her blood run cold. "They're still coming after us." "Not exactly." Jonas looked uncomfortable. "He says he wants to make peace." They found him in the kitchen. A young man in an expensive suit, maybe 30 years old, with nervous eyes and fidgeting hands. He stood when they entered, nearly knocking over his chair. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, thank you for seeing me." "We didn't agree to see anyone," Jacob said. "You're trespassing." "I know. I apologize. But I needed to speak with you, and I wasn't sure you'd agree if I asked permission." The man swallowed hard. "My name is William Harriman. I'm the new president of the Northern Pacific Railroad." Clara stared at him. "The new president?" "Yes, ma'am. Appointed 6 months ago after the previous leadership was forced to resign." Harriman's voice was tight. "I've been trying to clean up the mess they left behind. It's not easy. The company's reputation is in ruins. Our stock has lost half its value. Every newspaper in the country treats us like criminals." "You were criminals," Jacob said coldly. "The previous leadership was criminal. I had nothing to do with Stone or Pritchard or any of that." Harriman's voice grew stronger. "But I'm the one who has to fix it, and that's why I'm here." "To fix it how?" Harriman reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "The railroad owes a debt to this community, to the families we hurt, to the people who died because of our greed." He held out the envelope. "This is a start." Clara took it, opened it, and gasped. "This is a bank draft for $50,000. Yes, ma'am. To be distributed among the families of those killed or displaced by the railroad's actions, the Sandoval family, the O'Brien family, anyone else affected." Harriman's voice was earnest. It's not enough. I know that. Nothing could ever be enough. But it's what I can do right now. Jacob looked at Clara. Clara looked at the check. Why? She asked. Why are you really doing this? Harriman was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was different, softer, more personal. My father built railroads. He came to this country with nothing and created something that changed the world. He believed the railroad could bring people together, could help build a better future. Harriman's eyes glistened. He would have been ashamed of what this company became. I'm trying to make it something he could be proud of again. Clara studied him, looking for the lie, looking for the trap. She didn't find one. This money won't bring back the dead, she said finally. I know. It won't heal the wounds. I know that too. But it might help some families start over, build new lives, create something good from something terrible. Harriman nodded. That's my hope. Clara looked at Jacob. He shrugged slightly. Your call, his expression said. She turned back to Harriman. I'll make sure the money goes to the right people, but I want something else from you. Name it. A memorial, on the land where the Sandoval Ranch used to stand. A stone marker with their names, and the names of everyone else the railroad killed. Clara's voice hardened. I want the world to remember what happened here. I want the next president of the Northern Pacific to drive past that marker every time he comes to Montana and remember what happens when money matters more than people. Harriman paled, but he nodded. Done. And one more thing. Yes. Never come back to this ranch again. You've done what you came to do. Now leave us in peace. Harriman stood. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but Clara's eyes stopped him cold. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Mercer. I'll have my lawyers draw up the paperwork for the memorial. He walked out without looking back. Jacob watched him go. Then he turned to Clara with something like awe in his eyes. You just made the president of the Northern Pacific Railroad do exactly what you wanted. He wanted absolution. I gave him a chance to earn it. Clara looked at the check in her hands. This won't fix everything, but it's a start. That's all any of us can do. Start, and keep going. Fall came early that year. The leaves turned gold and red, and the first frost painted the ranch with silver. Clara and Jacob worked side by side, preparing the livestock for winter stocking supplies, making sure everything was ready for the cold months ahead. The Sandoval Memorial was unveiled in October. A granite stone with 4 names carved deep into its surface. Eduardo, Rosa, Miguel, Anna. Maria Dawson wept as she placed flowers at its base, and Henry Dawson held her while she mourned the family she had lost so long ago. Thank you, Maria said to Clara afterward, for not letting them be forgotten. No one should be forgotten, especially not the ones who died for nothing except being in the way of powerful men. The first snow fell on Emma's 11th birthday. Clara made a cake with sugar frosting, a luxury that cost more than she wanted to admit. Jacob gave Emma a saddle he'd been crafting in secret for months. And Jonas brought a puppy a golden ball of fur that immediately became Emma's most prized possession. What are you going to name him? Clara asked. Emma thought about it, looked at the puppy, looked at her father, looked at Clara. Justice, she said. I'm going to name him Justice. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. This girl, this fierce and gentle girl who had grown up in the shadow of violence and emerged with her heart still whole. That's a perfect name, Clara said. I know. Emma hugged the puppy close. Because that's what you and Papa fought for. And now we have it. So he should be named after it. That night, after Emma was asleep with Justice curled at her feet, Clara and Jacob sat by the fire. She's amazing, Clara said. She is. Jacob's voice was thick. Sarah would have loved to see her grow up. She's watching. I believe that. Wherever she is, she's watching and she's proud. You think so? I know so. Clara took his hand. The people we love don't really leave us, Jacob. They stay with us in our hearts, in our choices, in the way we live our lives. Sarah is part of Emma, Henry is part of me, and they're both part of this family we've built. Jacob looked at her, at this woman who had become the center of his world, at this woman who had taught him that love doesn't end when someone dies, it just changes shape. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Clara's breath caught. "Jacob, I know we never did this properly. We just fell into each other, started living together without any ceremony or vows." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the firelight. "I want to do it right. I want to stand in front of our friends and our family and God and say the words." "What words?" "That I love you, that I'll protect you, that I'll stand beside you for the rest of my life, no matter what comes." Jacob's voice trembled. "Clara Bennett, will you marry me for real this time?" Clara looked at the ring, at Jacob, at the life they'd built together. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger. She kissed him. And somewhere in the heavens, two people who had loved them once upon a time smiled down at the family that had risen from the ashes. The wedding was held in the spring. The whole town came. Jonas and his wife, Maria and Henry Dawson, old Moses who had tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, Widow Polk who had protected Emma when everything was falling apart, Walter Hudson who had traveled all the way from Helena to witness the occasion. Pastor Morrison performed the ceremony, the same pastor who had watched Clara expose Stone's corruption in his church 2 years ago, the same pastor who had seen fear turn to hope in the eyes of his congregation. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today." Clara barely heard the words. She was too busy looking at Jacob, at his gray eyes warm now instead of cold, at his weathered face softened by happiness, at the man who had ridden through a blizzard to save a stranger and ended up saving himself. "Do you, Jacob Mercer, take Clara Bennett to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Clara Bennett, take Jacob Mercer to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and the grace of Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Pastor Morrison smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Jacob kissed her. The congregation cheered. Emma threw flowers in the air. Justice the dog barked with excitement. And Clara Bennett Mercer, widow and survivor and fighter and mother, felt something she had thought she would never feel again. Complete. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening, Clara stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set. So much had changed. Emma was 16 now, tall and fierce and beautiful. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness and a spirit that was entirely her own. She was talking about going to college, about becoming a lawyer, about fighting for justice the way Judge Henry Bennett had fought. "She's going to change the world," Clara said. Jacob stood beside her, his arm around her waist. His hair was more gray than black now, but his eyes were still the same. Still warm, still kind, still full of love. "She already has," he said. "Just by being who she is." Clara leaned into him, felt the warmth of his body against hers, felt the safety and the comfort and the peace. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been on that road, if you'd taken a different route from Durango?" "Sometimes." Jacob's voice was thoughtful. "I think about all the ways my life could have gone differently, all the choices that led me here." "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." He turned to face her. "Everything I went through, everything I lost, everything I suffered, it all led me to you, and you are worth all of it." Clara kissed him, soft and sweet the way she had kissed him 1,000 times over the past 5 years, the way she would kiss him 1,000 times more. "I love you, Jacob Mercer." "I love you too, Clara Mercer." They stood there together watching the sun sink below the mountains. Two people who had walked through fire. Two people who had lost everything and found each other. Two people who had built a life from the ashes of destruction. In the barn, Hope, the horse, whinnied softly. In the house, Emma was practicing a speech she planned to give at her school graduation. At their feet, Justice the dog dozed peacefully in the fading light. This was home. This was family. This was everything. Clara thought about Henry. About the man she had loved first. About his dream of a world where truth mattered more than power. He had died for that dream. But his death had not been in vain. The corruption he had fought was gone. The men who had killed him were in prison or dead. And the ledger he had kept the evidence he had gathered had changed the course of history. More than that, his dream lived on. In Clara. In Emma. In everyone who had stood up that Sunday in the church and refused to be silent anymore. The truth is, like a lion Henry had written in his final letter. You do not have to defend it. Let it loose, and it will defend itself. Clara had set that lion free, and it had defended not just the truth, but everyone who believed in it. She thought about Rachel, Jacob's sister who had died alone on a mesquite tree in Arizona. The woman whose death had haunted Jacob for years, had made him look away from injustice, had nearly broken him. Rachel was at peace now. Jacob had finally forgiven himself for not saving her. And in saving Clara, he had found a way to honor his sister's memory. A way to prove that her death, too, had not been meaningless. She thought about Sarah, Jacob's first wife, Emma's mother, the woman who had loved this man before Clara ever knew he existed. Sarah had given Jacob the greatest gift of his life, their daughter. And now Clara had the privilege of helping raise that daughter, of watching her grow into someone remarkable, of loving her as fiercely as any mother could love a child. They were all connected, Clara realized. The living and the dead. The past and the present. The ones who had fallen and the ones who remained. They were all part of the same story, the same struggle, the same eternal fight between darkness and light. And in the end, light had won. What are you thinking about? Jacob asked. Clara smiled. Everything, everyone, the whole improbable journey that brought us here. That's a lot of thinking. I have a lot to think about. She turned to face him. We made it, Jacob. Through everything. The hanging, the running, the fighting, the trial. We made it. We did. And now we get to live. Really live. Not just survive, but thrive. Jacob nodded. His eyes were glistening, but he wasn't crying. He was smiling. The biggest, brightest smile Clara had ever seen on his face. You know what Henry would say if he could see us now? Clara asked. What? He'd say, I told you so. Clara laughed. He always believed that good would triumph over evil, that justice would prevail, that the truth would win in the end. He was right. He was right about a lot of things. Clara looked at the ring on her finger, at the ranch spread out before them, at the life they had built. But mostly he was right about one thing. What's that? Clara took Jacob's face in her hands, looked into those gray eyes that had seen so much pain and found so much healing. That love is stronger than fear. That hope is stronger than despair. That the people who stand up and fight even when they're terrified, even when the odds are against them, even when it seems impossible, those are the people who change the world. She kissed him again. Longer this time. Deeper. When they finally broke apart, the sun had disappeared below the horizon. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, alive with the promise of tomorrow. Ready to go inside? Jacob asked. In a minute. Clara looked up at the stars, at the infinite expanse of possibility stretching out above them. I just want to remember this moment, this feeling, this peace. Take all the time you need. I don't need time. Clara smiled. I have everything I need right here. She took his hand. They walked inside together into the warmth and the light, into the family they had created, into the future they had earned. Behind them, the sign on the gate swung gently in the evening breeze. Bennett Mercer Ranch, where truth runs free. And it did run free. It ran through the courts where corrupt men were finally held accountable. It ran through the newspapers that published stories too powerful to ignore. It ran through the hearts of ordinary people who had found the courage to stand up and say no more. It ran through Clara, who had been hanged between two oak trees and refused to die. It ran through Jacob, who had spent 6 years looking away and finally learned to see. It ran through Emma, who would grow up to become one of the first female lawyers in Montana, fighting for justice the way her stepmother and her stepfather had taught her. It ran through generations yet unborn who would hear this story and know that one person standing firm against the darkness could make all the difference in the world. The truth was free, and it would stay free forever. Because Clara Bennett Mercer had paid the price of freedom with her blood, her tears, her courage, and her love. And that price once paid could never be taken back. Not by corrupt marshals, not by greedy railroad companies, not by any force on earth. The truth would endure, and so would the family that had set it free. Clara looked at Jacob, at Emma, at the home they had built together, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning, not of a story, but of a legacy of truth, a legacy of courage, a legacy of love, a legacy that would outlast them all, the end.